This podcast, The Good, the Bad and the Vagina, is brought to you by me, Tess Lovely, a retired midwife, birth keeper, mother and sovereign woman. The views shared are my own and those of my guests. If something doesn't resonate, release it. It's not meant to upset or offend. If you feel discomfort, please seek support for your own healing. If you don't like what you hear, don't listen. This space honours truth, freedom and expression, protected under the rights to free speech. Welcome to The Good, the Bad and the Vagina. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to The Good, the Bad and the Vagina. The following episodes are with Caroline Spear, a doula with over 30 years experience. It was an incredible discussion that went on for hours, and so I naturally broke it into two parts. I hope that you, the listeners, get as much enjoyment out of listening to her and me speaking as I did having the conversation with her. It was absolutely phenomenal. So over to you guys, over to Caroline, The Good, the Bad and the Vagina. Welcome, Caroline Spear. Hello, Caroline. How are you?
Really excited to be here, Tess. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. Welcome to The Good, the Bad and the Vagina. I don't know a huge amount about you, Caroline, because obviously we've only had sort of a small contact really, but I will just say what I do know. So you're a doula, that you have been for over 30 years, which is the most exciting thing that I want to talk to you about, because I know we've had a conversation around all your work, but to be a doula for 30 years is quite significant, because 30 years ago, doulas were very few and far between. And in modern birthing, it seems that it is a little bit more of a necessity in the birthing arena now. So over to you to give an introduction of who you are, and then we'll just let the conversation flow.
Brilliant. So I'm 61. I should be 62 in February. Gulp. Where has the time gone to? It's like I came into doulaing because I have 4 fabulous daughters. After the birth of my first daughter, it was like, I don't want this to happen to any woman ever again. And by the time I had my first VBAC, home VBAC, we turned out to be the first water birth in North London in 1993, and the first home birth after a cesarean. We had some really lovely midwives, and I got to choose my midwife, because in those days you met them, you could say, don't like you, don't want you, who else is on the team, which was fantastic. So I then had 3 wonderful home births after my firstborn. The last one, I finally had I suppose the courage, it felt like, to say, actually, I don't want a midwife present. I want a couple of friends, because I want the kids looked after. I knew from my third birth that the most important thing to me was that my children were safe and happy and had somebody that they could go to. And I'd reached that stage where I also knew I just didn't want anyone to ask me anything. Didn't want anybody to ask me about my scar, because that was forbidden language. I didn't want anybody to ask, because they could just take my blood pressure or my pulse or even listening to baby, because I very much have an attitude of force. I knew when I was in labour, couldn't be bothered to tell anybody. It was mine and my baby's secret, and I'd let people know when I was ready to. And I certainly remember going to bed, and I did lots of VEs with my first VBAC, which was really interesting. And with number 4, I don't recall even bothering to do any, because I could just feel where she was in my body. I could feel how she was moving, where she was moving. By about midnight, any ideas of going back to bed and sleeping, I was out of bed, and just because things were coming closer and becoming more intense. It was a really beautiful birth. But they were all beautiful births, and that ecstatic joy of seeing your child, for your baby, for the first time. And during that time, I trained and became a qualified homeopath. With my youngest, when she was 9, she had a diagnosis of having neurofibromatosis type 1. I've been into nutrition all my life. I'd spent years as a vegetarian, had attempted veganism. I did try being raw food, but God, I was hungry. And it was so much hard work. So I trained as a GAPS practitioner, which is gut and psychology, gut and physiology, which I do believe I'm able to give pregnant women much better nutritional advice. So we don't get preeclampsia. If the iron levels get wobbly, we can work on that quickly. You can combine it with homeopathy. And so between my first home birth after a cesarean and training to be a homeopath, it just raised the level. It took me away from being the good little girl who felt she had to be dependent upon authority and kowtow to everybody else. So I'm working with lots of women who have been unemployed stroke full-time mothers for donkey's years. These women were phenomenal, and working with women, it was such a privilege. It made me question so much about my fears about even becoming a mother, and just seeing their strength. My God, women who had absolutely nothing. They lived on the 30th floor of a high-rise flat, and they were bringing up their children, and then they were learning to assert themselves and regain a life for them now they'd reached that stage of their lives. And then learning homeopathy and being able to use it with pregnant women, being able to use it in labour, being able to use it with their partners as well, with my own kids, and realising there's more than one side to every story. But going back to number four, when I can't remember the children's names, I call them in birth order. When I get the birth order wrong, they still know who I'm talking about, bless them. They're incredible women. So proud of my daughters. But anyway, so she had the diagnosis, which is what brought me into GAPS, because she'd had pains that we couldn't explain or give any relief from for many years. Lots of other bits and pieces. And also she went from being, I'm guessing, 'cause I didn't do weighing of babies. They were healthy. They did what they had to do. But she certainly went from at least the 85th centile down to the 2nd centile by the age of 9 for her growth, and learning about GAPS, which was set up by a woman, a doctor, who was told, your child's autistic. There, dear. We have no cure. Off you go. And so she did. And she researched and she researched and she devised GAPS. So that's, again, women power. And when you're talking to people, you can always say everything we all have in common is that unless cesarean was needed, we've all come through a woman's vagina. And I love that word, vagina. It's my party piece. People know when I've had a class too many, because you go think you're writing vagina, 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 and everyone's had a placenta. So, which obviously they're fabulous things that grow. So that's a little bit about me. I home educated my children. I used to be somebody who totally believed in God, the state, the Queen. You did everything for those three things until the birth of my first child. And I did this 190, 360 degree flip.
That's quite an interesting thing, because one of the things that I talk about quite often is when women have a baby, how it changes the trajectory of where they're going in their pathway. They think that they're going to go down one avenue, and actually becoming a mother, and it happens throughout every baby, you find yourself completely down a different journey than you ever anticipated.
Well, I think with first time mums, they can't hear, they're not ready for anything beyond the birthing day. And then they learn so much, they're just plunged in. If they're lucky, they've got good family and support around them. With number two, it's, they bounce. Am I allowed to say that? But, well, I mean, I've been at some births where a baby's head has been coming through a vagina, and mum's gone, and suddenly the baby is on the floor. And they've been standing as goalkeeping skills.
I do believe that the medical establishment, to some degree, and our modern living and the way that we are, has generated so much fear around the childbirth and babies that we actually forget that we've been doing this for millions of years, and we didn't particularly get it massively wrong. The thing that contributed to the poorer outcomes of mums and babies is definitely our diet and lifestyle, our housing conditions, and whether or not we have running water. And if those things are actually in a really good space and place, the chances of an outcome, or physically and being well, are really, really improved. What's now coming into the birth arena that I think is inhibiting it is that big dollop of fear that women are now carrying around, that if we don't engage in this medical model, then it's all going to go horribly wrong. And people aren't actually seeing that it's the engagement in the medical model that's making it all go horribly wrong.
I think the situation is far worse than when I had my first. I think that we've gone backwards massively. People don't understand nutrition. They don't understand that it's the health of the sperm that produces a healthy placenta and therefore contributes towards a healthy baby and a healthy mother. Those men have got a lot to answer for, and that's still not being addressed. And then when you come into, as you say, unhealthy mums aren't eating healthy diets, they're at greater risk of preeclampsia, iron insufficiency. My iron levels went really low with my fourth baby, and I talk about this openly. I went back to being vegetarian because I thought it was the healthiest thing to do, and actually, no, it wasn't. My child, I believe, suffered because of, although we thought we were eating healthily, we clearly weren't, because we wouldn't have had the outcome. Our daughter wouldn't have neurofibromatosis type 1. I think also that the problem with the medical model is, and of course, there's nothing on my desk to pick up and go, when you can put things into test tubes, you can measure. The problem is, even when you're measuring cells in a test tube, they're not in their natural environment. So they haven't got all the components that makes them work. And women, men, boys and girls, children, people, humanity, there are parts of us that are the same, but there are other parts that aren't. And for some women, for sure, they need good medical care. And when it's there for them and their baby, fantastic. But the vast majority of women, we've become so divorced and detached from our bodies. And, part of this podcast is the vagina. We're brought up to keep our vaginas hidden, out of sight. We menstruate, we start to bleed, we're dirty, we have to hide that. Men wear tight trousers and you can see everything. Yay! And yet when a woman is wearing tight leggings, you'll get some really horrible comments about the goat's hoof. And I forget the other horrible things they say. And yet we have so many different words for our vaginas, all of which have gone out of my head now, apart from things like the foof. We used farfallina with our girls because it's Italian for butterfly, a little butterfly, which I thought was rather sweet. And I had other friends that were anatomically correct. But the fear, women forget we evolved. We became upright. We carry our babies for about 9 months, 9 to 10. I don't really believe in the male. See, the male measurements in this country, 40 weeks, your term. No, you're not. In France, it's 41. In Germany, it's 42.
If you went back historically, neither of those are the correct things, because birthing is based around the Mayan candle and it's around the lunar months. You're actually pregnant for 10 lunar months. The Native Americans, and I introduce this a lot when I'm working with women, for the last lunar month of their pregnancy, the men would massage the women's feet in honour of them carrying the pregnancy. And part of that was to honour the pregnancy and to say thank you for producing the whole human and a miracle for me. That's amazing. You're brilliant. But it would counteract any overdueness. We recognise that our feet, when we do reflexology, they link with part of our anatomy. So it would improve the circulation, your kidney stimulation, your liver stimulation, but also the uterus. And so they didn't have an issue with babies being overdue. That's only since we've tried to control and put everything into a calendar that is nothing to do with us as human beings, because it's not with our circadian rhythms. And if you look at ethnicity, each and every person, each ethnic group has a different length of a gestational period. And that's never considered. They've come up with this figure and number because that helps with our Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, January through to December kind of calendar that we live with.
That's crazy, isn't it? Because back in the early days when I was doing lots and lots of vaginal birth after cesarean support, and the number of women that were referred to me who had had 2 cesareans and didn't want another cesarean. And so you would then have things like certain races of women that their babies stayed high until the last moment and are being sectioned, being forced to have major abdominal surgery because the baby hadn't descended. But once they had fully opened up and everything was ready and right, just like when the cord is really short, those babies come really quickly. But they weren't fitting the labour curve. When I was first having babies, it was the estimated due date. And the E has disappeared. And my mum always said babies can come 3 weeks either side. And guess what? My first 2 of mine have come at 37, one at 43, and one at 49. And the reason I can tell you that is because with after my first baby, A, I didn't have any scans. B, I always knew when I had conceived, whether I heard a voice or I saw stars. So I knew that was when sperm had met egg and hey, I was having another baby. So I was and I mean I
Mm.
talk about that. I used to think it was a load of hippie nonsense that you could consciously say no to a baby. But once I realized that I was getting that warning, it was one voice said, "Mama, I'm here, can I come in?" And I remember once hearing a voice and going, "Actually, no, I really don't want another baby. You need to go and find somebody else." And ordinarily, oh, I would have been pregnant, and I wasn't. So we lose touch with our bodies. You know, we spend hours on flipping Google, we YouTube it. I'm going to have a bit of a rant here now. You see some amazing hypnobirthing births, and they're terrifying. The woman hardly moves, she hardly makes a sound, and voila, she has a baby. You set women up that if they don't achieve that or they start to need to use their voices, these wonderful primal voices that women have, when quiet women suddenly say, in labour, I'm going, "Oh, yes, bring it on," because she's really into her labour. But it's setting women up. We have to measure and prod. So from the moment a woman dares to admit that she's pregnant, in most circles, it's got your midwife, been to see the doctor, have you had this test? Have you had that test? And then she's on this roller coaster of measurements. Scan, 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 blood test, prod, poke. And the fact that midwives are still using that stupid bloody tape measure to do fundals. I mean, I was measuring a month ahead with pregnancy number 3. And my midwife, I have Mary Cronk, fabulous, wonderful independent midwife. And Mary sat there and she went, "Caroline, you're not going to like this suggestion." I don't. So she said, "Would you consider a scan in case you've got twins?" And I went, "No." And she said how inaccurate these things were. She hated using them. And a month later, my bump was back in range. So maybe my baby was just having a good stretch. Maybe I had some bladder or a growth spurt. Well, that's the other thing, you know, when you do a scan, I've had 3 miscarriages at different stages. Phenomenal where 2 were very close together, the difference in growth. So as you say, babies have growth spurts.
The scan's only gonna be as good as the sonographer doing it. It's a bit like the tape measurement. There's such a variant on people, and they say, "Oh, no, it's not supposed to be." But they introduce all these tools, and actually a lot of them aren't fit for purpose, and then they'll defend using them, saying, "Well, we haven't got any
Mhm.
other tool to use." So a bit like the BMI tool. How inaccurate is BMI in terms of measuring?
Most of us are obese according to BMI. It's not. We've just got a bit of muscle here, a bit of muscle there, a bit more somewhere else. And ultrasound, it does piss me off. It has a place. There are times when it really is useful. But when you think it came in as "Oh, we can see inside the body," doctors jumping around the ultrasound with my first, they were so excited. Who could find this part? How many hairs could they count? How many fingers? And and me not realizing that my baby's it's all like, "Get out of here. This is hurting me," because it's high frequency pitch sound. Babies, can you imagine having that going through your ear? It's horrific. But because it became a way of looking at the baby, so the machines were quickly sold, but without ever being properly and fully tested. And back in the 90s, there was research from Australia which showed that women having 4 or more scans, their babies on average were 2 ounces lighter than women that weren't having scans. But it heats up the fluids.
Think with deafness because of the sound waves going through, especially if you're having it done at a particular point when um, certain parts of the growth are occurring. There's a massive amount of development going on, and historically they used to do scans quite early, around 10 weeks. And there's a lot of talks about the challenges that scans cause. I know my son had a range of hearing loss. I think he had selective hearing.
The best way to test a child's hearing is let them all be up in their bedroom playing loudly, doing what they want, and you quietly sneak that chocolate or packet of crisps, and they're all straight down there immediately. Our children that do have hearing loss and hearing issues, and it does need to be worked out. But it's the guilt trip that's put upon you. "Oh, he won't bond with his baby if he doesn't see his baby." I have women who are harassed by the hospital system because they choose, and I'm not going to say they make an informed decision. Why should you make an informed decision? It's your choice whether or not you want to go and submit your baby to ultrasound. With one woman, she had a cyst underneath her placenta, which eventually went. We treated it homeopathically. And the obstetrician said, the thing is, we can't unsee what we see. She just had the most fabulous home birth, very quiet, very gentle. But as she said, if she'd listened to them, she'd already had 2 home births and a hospital birth. She didn't want another hospital birth unless there was a genuine need, and everything was fine.
I also think as well the discrepancy with scanning is that every single baby from conception that they can mark out from conception as to what date it will be and what growth it is. And I disagree with that because I think dependent where the sperm and the egg come into contact along the tube, there's a certain space where that fertilization needs to occur. But if it's at the
Mhm.
top end or the lower end, would depend on how many multiplications have happened before it kind of
Mhm.
embeds, and that would really influence the
Yeah,
sort of the growth
yeah.
and the development. And the other thing as well is that when babies are born, when humans are born, they are come out at all different shapes and sizes. They're all different shapes and sizes from the very beginning.
Oh, they are. And again, it's that, "Oh, your baby's really big. They've got a huge belly." And I'm going, "Yeah, it's all squidgy. Your vagina is going to open up and is still strong enough to help let this baby out." It's just like the strength of your vagina and its elasticity, it's phenomenal. A baby's belly will squidge inwards. Women are given that, "Oh, it's a big baby." If I remember correctly, there's no more chance of a shoulder dystocia with a big baby than there is with a little baby.
No, it's more to do with positioning. A big baby can only get in one way. I've had big babies. So my first baby weighed 7 pound 2. My second was induced early because I had ovarian cancer, and so they induced me early, and she was 6 pound 3. Then I went to 9 pound 7 home birth, he was, and then I
Yeah.
had a 10 pound and then an 11 pound home birth. I just produce big babies. I'm not a big person. I'm only a size 10, so I'm not a huge woman. And that's just who I am and my makeup. My mum was 5'2" and she produced big babies. I was her lightest one at 8 pound 8.
I was told that my pelvis after my first baby hadn't been proven and wasn't big enough for a 7-pounder. So my second one was back to back, and we had her weighed probably about 4 hours after she was born, and she was 9 pounds 1 ounce, and she'd passed loads of
Mm.
meconium by then. And I'm going, my pelvis too small. I supported one mum who first time baby, she had an independent midwife who was available at the last moment. And at some stage, she was in the pool, and we weren't too sure what we could see, and she just wasn't getting out of the water. And so the independent midwife, wonderful woman, said, stripped off to her underwear, jumped into the pool, and actually coming through the woman's labia were the baby's fingers. Just doing that. So this little one was born, hand up here, and weighed 11 pounds. No tears,
Mm.
no heavy bleeding, all was normal. Then we used to have stories of women in Portsmouth, 4'8", birthing 11 and 12-pounders at home. So the myth that the woman's body is inadequate is another thing that's sent to scare us. And when you go back to the whole analogy of when you're inside, when you're using test tubes to measure, there's no expandability, there's no flexibility, there's no elasticity, is there? And when we're not forced into positions that are comfortable and suit the doctor or the midwife.
We were birthing since the millennium, and I do think our confidence and our belief in our abilities to birth have been eroded since probably the real patriotic system got hold of when religion came in and education and the medicalisation and all that sort of thing. Up until then, we were doing a pretty good job. And I'm not saying that women and children survive in childbirth because there were some poor outcomes. We can't eradicate poor outcomes. And the model that's in place is saying that we need to reduce neonatal and maternal deaths by this
Mhm.
percentage by this date. That will never eradicate to that point because there's all the phenomenal mishap or unfortunate thing that happens and that we're not in control of. and we're trying to play God over something that we can't be godlike over. My favourite joke, I'll tell you my favourite joke. What's the difference between God and a consultant?
God shows mercy.
God doesn't think he's a consultant.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I, years ago, I was at a conference and I was talking about home birth and birth after cesarean section, vaginal birth after cesarean section. Why are we calling it vaginal birth after cesarean section? Why do we have to differentiate? To have a cesarean section, you have major abdominal surgery, and for every woman who chooses to have one, absolute respect, because I personally would not want major abdominal surgery. Not, it's not something I would choose. I don't want the pain. I don't want the long-term damage. I knew what the weather was doing for 20 years after having an epidural. My back was really messed up and the weird headaches I would get. And then the adhesions, God, the breaking of those adhesions during the next pregnancy were so painful. And of course, I know women who have had adhesions stick bowel and uterus together that have caused the bowels to twist, and they've nearly lost their lives due to sepsis. And the number of women who, after cesarean now, who are ending up with sepsis. Mind you, that the cesarean section rate was so much lower, but women, there weren't the number of women having sepsis and going back into hospital in a life-threatening state, which ain't great for their baby either.
Part of the increase of infections is, I
Mm.
believe, down to diet and lifestyle again. I believe that, people they're starting off on a poorer back foot health wise because they're not adequately eating. And we all know that sort of BMI, our size has increased, and bugs love dark, wet, warm spaces. So having a cesarean, having an over apron, having a big abdominal, having a tear
Mhm.
even in your vagina creates a perfect environment for a bug to have a little field day, and because it's dark, it's wet, and it's warm. But the other thing with cesarean sections is because a lot of the cesareans are caused through the induction and the whole many
Mm.
VEs, the many VEs, the many VEs, and all of those. It's inevitable if we keep going around taking a hand from an environment, even if we're using a sterile technique and we're putting it into a dark, wet, warm space, we're going to
Mhm,
be
mhm.
introducing an opportunity for bugs to get in there.
And then when the woman isn't well nourished, you're constantly having sugar and fruit. Every time you do, you reduce your white blood cell count massively. So when you need your white blood cells to be fighting infection, and you're having sugar and you're having carbohydrates, too many carbohydrates that are converted to glucose in the body, you're also losing your body's natural defense. Then there is definitely the lack of D3 because we're told to cover up, put toxic creams on our skin, and don't go in the sunlight. Well, I do go out in the sunlight. I don't use toxic creams, and I do work to make sure that my D levels stay up. But we need them. But we need the benefit of the sun on our immune system, our mental emotional welfare, our hearts. Hospitals are for sick people, and I think one of the big issues for me with hospitalization of childbirth is that we're telling women that they're sick. And we've immediately put that psychology of, I'm going to the hospital. Well, we normally go to hospital because somebody's dying and we're going to go and nurse them out, or because they're really ill. And for sure, if I was in a hideous accident, I'd be very grateful for the mechanical surgeries, etc. If it's true that the microbiome is best when a baby is born at home, when a baby comes through the mother's vagina, with all those wonderful juices that she secretes, with any feces that's around, even if the baby has a beautiful vaginal birth in a hospital, their microbiome is still inadequate, or it's inferior to when babies are born in their own home. And then, of course, completely different when they're born by cesarean section. So, yes, talking about the increase in sepsis and postnatal infections, childbirth, it seems to be the one time in a woman's life when she's legitimately expected to say yes, 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 even when she wants to say no, 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 no.
Well, it's incredible, isn't it, that from a very young age, they're told to hide their vagina and it's not for public display and, hide away from it. It's shameful. Don't look at it. And then suddenly you become pregnant and it becomes the property of the hospital where anybody, some stranger who doesn't generally introduce himself, will come in and go, "Hello, I'm Doctor," I don't know, make up a name probably. I'm just gonna stick my hands at your vagina. I've never met you before, but I'm sure your husband won't mind.
No. Oh, and I would now like my colleague to also check just to make sure that they agree with me. What? Hello, wife. I've got a couple of lovers. I'd like you to have one, and then you can have the other one, so I can see if they're both okay for you. It is. It's outrageous. I encourage women to get to know their vaginas and to get to know what their cervix feels like. So if they're feeling curious during their labour, they can do their own vaginal examinations. And here's the thing. Obviously, as a birthing advocate, birthing doula, birth keeper, birth companion, whatever you want to call me is what I do. Um, Sometimes parents are choosing not to call midwives until the last moment, or they want to be absolutely certain that mum's far enough in labour. And I've been asked to do vaginal examinations. I don't. Apart from the fact if I'm correct, the NMC Code of Conduct says that is midwifery duty. It's not a doula duty. So I will say to dads, in front of mums, obviously, well, how about you do it? Because you're intimately acquainted, you know each other. And I'll explain what they might feel. And a couple of dads have done so. And I leave the room and I don't want to be there watching this because to me it's an intimate act. It's personal. And they might want to have just a bit more time smooching together. And I always encourage couples to smooch. I say, I'm going, call me when you want me back, and I don't need to know what you've been up to. It's, but they've come back and they've described what they felt. Some have guessed how far dilated they felt their partner might be, their woman might be. And in terms of how long labours have been after that, I think they've been right with what they said. Now, I can't fully interpret it. I could only give you a rough idea, describe the cervix is a bit like a nose with one hole. If it's starting to disappear, it becomes there's less and less of it. You can't get your finger around the size of the cervix. So that could be your first indication that your cervix is definitely disappearing, lifting. We feel confident about that. Then, obviously, you don't stick your finger up your nose, but will the finger gently go inside? And it's not going to be circular. A baby's head is not circular. A baby's head is maybe more pear-shaped. And obviously, if the waters are bulging, something might feel hard and they don't know if it's a head or if it's bulging waters. And do we really need to know? I'm not sure if we do. But it's not very often this happens. But it's certainly something that when mum and dad call me back in, that there's no uptightness. They're just completely relaxed they're together. And there's this beautiful atmosphere of trust and intimacy. And maybe that's why the labour moves on nicely and quickly.
Don't think a cervix holds a baby in. Absolutely, it's not the cervix, it's the position that the baby's in that influences the length of the birth. 'Cause you can have a cervix sitting at 5 centimeters for 10 hours if the baby's not presenting in a good position, and then it does a turnaround, and then 2 minutes later, it's out and on the bed. It is to do with the position of the baby, and if the baby is in a really well presenting position, it will pass its way through the vagina in a lovely, uneventful way.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. When you get women into different positions or some of the spinning baby techniques, I've seen babies turn on the perineum, and that's it. They're being born, and when you get that right, it's fantastic. So I agree wholeheartedly. The cervix is just that. It's a snapshot in time. The cervix might go, don't like being touched, and close up again. As you say, depending on where the baby is also going to make a big difference. I absolutely agree with you. But sometimes some women want that reassurance or they want that knowledge.
Again, that has come down to the commercialisation of childbirth, though, because the model has said we need to know this information. And it's like, who needs to know it? Who needs to know? we don't really need to know.
Put it on a chart, can't they? That they can then charts.
I've seen a few horses giving birth and a few animals giving birth, and I've never seen them then go, could you just shove your hand up and see how far dilated I am? What I have seen is when they've had a little foal inside that's not in the best position, them jigging themselves away in a different position. They do this like really weird thing horses do before they give birth. But the dance that they have got leading up to that, you can tell if it's like in a well presenting foal because of the way that they conduct themselves. If they're wandering around and running around in the field and they're in labour and there's something amiss.
There's something amiss, isn't there? I was with a goat last year, and it was her first pregnancy, and she had twins, and the owner did step in at one stage with one of the twins, which I thought was, ooh, to pull the goat out. But this goat initially was wanting to be with the rest of the goats, and that just wasn't happening. And eventually, the sheep in the field all disappeared away from her, and she just got on with it. She birthed her twins, and then suddenly all the sheep ran up, so the sheep, and they all stood, they all looked around, the leader went, bah, and they all went, bah, turned around and ran off again. It was this beautiful worshipping. But one of my friends had a teeny tiny cat, impossibly small, who became pregnant. And she said during the labour, eventually part of the kitten came out. And then suddenly the mum stood up, jumped up onto a table, jumped off the table onto a chair, and made some very interesting movements. And eventually this kitten was born. The kitten was obviously wasn't as big as her. The kitten is now 4 times her size. But this cat, left to her own devices, knew what she needed to do. I mean, I saw this not so long ago with a mum who, first-time mum, and had chosen to free birth. And at the beginning, we thought, oh, we're not going to be here very long. Everything seems, all the signs, moving on really quickly. And then she had the bearing down sensation. I think they were positional pushes to get baby. But again, left to her own devices, we saw her make the most incredible squats, standing up, movement, opening wide one leg for a while and then easing the other. And, in the hospital environment or with midwives who are wanting to listen in every 15 minutes, then after every push, how to build up adrenaline. Midwife can't find the heart rate. Oh, now she's found the heart rate. Is it all good? Is it all good? Is it all good? Adrenaline. Oxytocin. Perplexes and baffles me. Bearing in mind, of course, my last 3 daughters, one didn't have any monitoring and the other 2 had a couple of minutes just before they were born. Well, 30 seconds actually, because that was all I was having. So you see that when women are left to their own devices and they are in a place of trust and love, their ability to move their bodies, to be in touch with what's going on. So are VEs necessary? They have a place if labour's been going on for so long, you just can't quite work out what's going on.
That VE I would be doing, I wouldn't be doing it to assess the cervix. I would be doing it to find the position out. And when I was a labour coordinator, that was my thing. And I would say to the midwives, they'd come out and they'd go, oh, she's 6 centimetres. I'd go, what position is the baby in? Tell me that piece of information, because if I know that, then I can know what's going to go on. I read this a long, long time ago when I first started doing my training about how babies rotate the same way the water. So babies rotate clockwise. If they're if they're on the right hand side, they're what we call an ROL here, like and they're not going to go a little way so they can come out in an OA position. They're going to take the long rotation around. And I used to see it all the time with women that would come in and their midwives had told them that baby was in a really good position, and I'd help and I'd go, oh, it's an ROA. This is going to be a long, long labour. Then their labours would go, and I'd say you need to get in the bath on your left-hand side in a recovery position. I taught them all through, do some breathing with them and relax. And I would watch them over a course of hours. Then they'd complain and go, my back's really hurting, I can't cope. And I'd go, keep going, you've got this. Once it had rotated around the back, take them round to delivery suite and they'd have a baby a few hours later. But that long rotation around that process was phenomenal. When their baby was on their back, they would have doubling up of contractions. They'd be really incoordinate. They'd have that immense backache. They'd be going, something doesn't feel right. And it's like, no, it's okay. It's encouraging. And if you get really good breathing techniques going with women, so they're more relaxed and they sink in to the labour instead of fighting it, it stands a far greater chance of rotating and coming around into the right position.
I've with my first VBAC, she was back to back, and fortunately I'd done the research in terms of I knew it was going to hurt. And actually, it was really good to know that because it really bloody well did hurt. You know, it felt like every vertebra was being wrenched. And I do remember that with her fighting the contractions. Oh no, here's another one. Here's another one. I'm pulling up and tightening up, and which now when I'm working with women, it's all about the letting go. You know, like people joke about the floppy face, floppy fanny. Yay! And using the breathing. And I do wonder if a lot of midwives have lost the skill, or did they ever learn the skill to support them in the way that you've just described, and in the way that many doulas, birth keepers, advocates are supporting women when, as you say, babies have got the long rotation, the back feels like it's going to break, but they just really need to be reassured that. And you use the word incoordinate, the contractions incoordinate. I'd like to suggest that those were very coordinated contractions, because those contractions were working to get that baby. Thank you. After all these years, thank you. You've just helped me explain something I've been working on for a while. That use of the word incoordinate. Actually, I think they're coordinating perfectly because they're doing what the baby needs.
How I used to explain it to women is that the uterus contracts like this, and it squeezes the baby down into the pelvis. It contracts tight. Then when it relaxes, it doesn't go back to where it was originally. It goes back a bit and it keeps squeezing this baby down. When it hits something solid, which would be a back, part of the uterus will remain still and the other will carry on contracting because it wants to force the baby around into the right position, which is why you get the doubling up. One side of it has stopped contracting, but the other is going to carry on contracting so that it can shift that back around. So you're right, they are very well coordinated because they're doing the job that they're meant to be doing. From a medical model point of view, it's described as incoordinate because there's no coordination in terms of they're not doing that bell-shaped coming and going in that rhythm. But there is an actual reason why that's happening. So when you get incoordinate contractions, or you get coupling or doubling of contractions, or whatever you want to call it, I would always go, right, we've got a positional thing here. Let's change. Let's move the baby. Let's move the woman down on all fours, get a bum up in the air, go on a left side, do some rocking. I do remember going to this woman's birth, and she was a French lady. And she had no blood tests in her pregnancy. She lived off the earth. They collected berries and things like that. They were real salt of the earth people. And she went into labour on my husband's birthday. And because she hadn't had any blood tests, none of the other midwives really wanted to facilitate and support her. So I was on call for her. She rang me and she said, my labour's starting. And I said, all right, I'll get there as soon as I can. My friend was having a baby at the same time. So I did my friend's birth first and then I whizzed off. And so my husband didn't have a birthday that year. She'd been walking around. She had no furniture in the house. She'd been walking around. There was a male midwife, Mark, that I used to work with, and he was supporting her in that early part. She was walking around naked, squatting on the floor, pushing, pooing, walking around, just absolutely, completely not in any control. I managed to kind of get her breathing and calming her down, and she kept saying that she wanted to die, and I knew instantly that this baby was an OP. And then she said, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Her really strong throes of pain. And I said, do whatever is your body is telling you. And she said, it's telling me to lie on the floor like a starfish. And I went, then do that. And she laid on this wooden floor with her legs out akimbo. And literally, I watched this baby rotating. And I thought, well, of course, it makes sense. If the head is sitting on the coccyx, it's just going to force the baby into a better position. And she just had this most beautiful baby. It was incredible.
Well, and we're back to these lovely stories where women are supported and trusted to follow their. Sometimes, yes, you do need to make suggestions. Like when I see women constantly sat on a settee like this all the time, and I'm going, it's going to have a difficult rotation, or it's going to be not getting into the best of positions. So just to give them the courage and the confidence. The breathing, by the way, I don't know what kind of breathing techniques you do. I learnt Buteyko breathing many years ago to help with um, other people's asthma and some, I suppose, some deep meditational stuff. And then I realised one day I'd never used this breathing for my own birth. Didn't really know about it, and I very much went on the instinctively know what to do. Sheila Kitzinger told me don't scream at the top of your throat. She said moo oo ah. So I practiced that. Um, so I decided that if I'm telling if I'm telling women, you really this will help you. This will help to relax. It will help to ease. Great word, ease. And I better actually try this out for myself. So was having some minor dental surgery, and I said to the surgeon, "I'm going to use breathing techniques." And the guy freaked, so I don't want any anaesthetic. He was more tense than I was. But I practiced. I'm from the Pink Kicked Birthing Better as well. Their breathing techniques, love them, so good. And so I practiced. I used them, which also kept me in a space to be able to ignore whatever he was doing. And I came through surgery, and I didn't have an anaesthetic, and so I have practiced, admittedly not in my own birth because it's too late for that now, but I have practiced with dental surgery using breathing techniques and grounding and centering myself. And they work, but it really does. 'Cause, you know, we tense our bottom, we tense our vagina, we put everything up, and actually we just want to allow it to soften and open.
I say to women, if you're wearing your shoulders as earrings, then you're not birthing. You're not going to have a baby. I do it myself. If ever I hurt myself or accidentally have an injury, I tend to just fall into it, because if you fall into the center of pain, there is no pain. The pain is only on the outside. If you get into the center of it, it's completely still and there isn't any.
Mhm. Do you think this is coming back to before Christianity and other religions started to tell women that they were dirty and that pain births should be painful because we were fallen Eves, whatever that meant. And then stories from Dick Grantley Reid of women in tenements saying, "Was it meant to hurt?" And good old Monty Python, the meaning of life. The stories that got told at work were always the horror stories. Between the don't sit on that chair because you will get pregnant. And there is actually something in that because of the hormones a pregnant woman exudes. Tell other women, time to have a baby. Hence that chair. When you go into childbirth with all the horror stories, and I can remember you couldn't talk about the trauma that you experienced. Remember that one other woman touched me once and said, "Caroline, I think I'm feeling similar to you." And we talked because I had PTSD. They hadn't waited for the epidural to take effect when they'd gone it. They didn't wait for the epidural when they used forceps. And like me, she had an out of body experience. She was up on the ward. Now there's a thing. I ended up suing after my first birth, and prosecution service had accepted that an assault and an indecent assault had taken place. But it wasn't in the public interest to prosecute because it had happened in a hospital. And eventually I had an out of court settlement. It was a long journey. I wanted my day in court. I had always wanted my day in court because I wanted it established in case law that a woman's right to say no did not stop the moment she entered a maternity unit. I have a very strong feeling now that women are stripped of their rights to say no from the fear and the system that we now have within the birthing system, the NHS. Dr. High and Mighty. I'll emphasize the first three letters, consultants. When a consultant has not seen a normal physiological birth, when a consultant hasn't been graced with the honour of being with a woman when she calls them during her labour, to sit quietly on their hands, exuding nothing but confidence, because if they can't exude anything but love and confidence, then they shouldn't be there. Because we're animals, and animals sense. A woman can sense when her man needs to go to the loo, or her birthing partner or her wife needs to go to the loo, because they will tense. And she will sense that tension. One of the big roles that men love when I'm supporting them is that I'm there for them as well. And that means if they need to eat, breathe, sleep, go and have a fag, drink a pint, go and sit on the loo, they know that they can. They're not deserting. And when consultants aren't at physiological birth, they don't see the power of a woman birthing as God, Goddess, Kali, whatever you want to call the universal divine energy intended us.
I have met some really, really good
Mm.
obstetricians that I've learned skills from, emergency skills that have gifted me. When they're needed and you want them there, it's amazing. But when they're there and they're not needed, that's when they become a hindrance. And it's a big thing that I've been talking about. It's a bit like do-gooding. When do-gooding happens, it actually undoes the actual goodness of what they're meant to be doing. Then you can't see the woods for the trees. So when we've got all the women going through a service and we're looking for one person that may not be able to do as well as the other 99, we can't
Mm-hmm.
find one person that needs that help. So we apply it to all people just in case, so we don't miss them. And in order to save that one person, the other 99 are actually being quite injured and traumatized as a result of
Yep.
that.
It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. I'm going to mention vitamin K. If it's a universal fact that all babies are born with, and we're back to measurements, aren't we? Born with so-called low levels of vitamin K. Is that not because physiologically there's a reason for that? Is that not because nature doesn't want babies to have their blood clotting immediately? Is that not because the gut has to be populated and begin over time for the liver to kick out and kick in rather for enzymes and therefore for bacteria, healthy bacteria to start to develop? I've been in rooms where you've seen midwife after obstetrician after pediatrician stand over a woman and hector her. But you're not tell them what to look out for, what might be of concern, because actually there's far greater risk of other things happening than hemorrhagic brain disease.
It is very rare, but if it happens, there's usually an underlying medical condition. So we're prophylactically treating all of these
Mhm.
babies and masking children that actually have an underlying issue. That's masked until a later date. Those babies that do have that, they have it even though they have the vitamin K. When research like that is introduced, it's never robust enough for it to be introduced for it to stand any validity, but then it's in and then it's feared to be removed.
It comes back to ultrasound, the use of scans, doesn't it? It came in, everyone thought, wow, this is wonderful. It became popular before it was ever actually tested. So, sorry, mums, your babies, and probably you, we've all been guinea pigs, and we continue to be.
CTG monitoring, that was the same thing. They introduced that and it had absolutely no research, none whatsoever.
How do I put this politely? Which lacking in brain person came up with the design for those bloody things, trying to keep the juicer, those oval flat bits, on a wonderfully active baby and labour, and also, of course, you're putting high pitched frequency sounds through that baby.
Yes. And once again, you're saying to the woman, without this, we
Yep.
won't know what's going on with your baby. We end up with a load of cesarean sections because we're concerned about the well-being of the baby and the baby comes out screaming and
Mhm.
crying. And then we
Yep.
have a
Yep.
baby that has a normal CTG and it comes out and
Mhm.
unfortunately it doesn't respond in the way that we wish to. And then they run off and do blood gases and the blood gases are totally obscured and poor readings and they're only as good as the person taking them. But they will say time and time and time again, it's because it's the only tool we've got. Then don't use a bad tool. That's like saying to a painter and decorator, here's a makeup brush, paint my living room.
I'm going to go back to Mary Cronk. I wouldn't have Sonicades. I allowed one once for one baby so her older sister could hear the heartbeat, and within 15 seconds we stopped. And Mary said the thing with a pinard is that as a midwife, she said, you get to know both mum and baby, which gives you a better idea if you need to listen in or want to listen in during labour, what's going on with that baby. Because you've been with mum and baby throughout the growth and the development, you've got to know both. And I thought, wow, it just makes so much sense, doesn't it? You haven't
Mm.
divorced your midwife. You haven't divorced mum and her baby. You've kept this beautiful unit together. When you're using the pinard and how midwives have to work with mums, in many ways, it's got the mum more involved as well because of the position that she's in. And yes, she's waiting to hear what the midwife has to say. Sometimes mums are saying, well, actually, baby's more here. And so the midwife will then know to move the pinard slightly further around. But as you say, we're back to using our senses, aren't we? when we sense for our babies and what we're doing, when we're able to let our labour flow, our vagina is able to just open and accommodate and do what it needs to do. But we're I mentioned orgasmic birth earlier. And I just think how many women fake it for so long, and then does childbirth suddenly change everything for them?
We don't openly talk about sexual arousal and sexual pleasure for a
Mhm.
woman. It's
Yeah.
very difficult for women to gather and understand the mechanics of how their body works and what they like and what they don't like. And what works for one person isn't going to work for somebody else. What arouses one woman isn't going to be the same arousal factor or point for another woman. And we don't discuss or talk about any of these things. So then when we enter into a birthing arena, we're trying to expect all these women to birth in exactly the same way. But of course, most of them may struggle with actually understanding how their sexual arousal works, let alone understand what's going on mechanically or emotionally or hormonally with them in an everyday setting, let alone entering into a birth arena where suddenly we've got the big cape of fear that's come over us.
Mhm. The old story of you put a couple and say, "Right, you've got to make love and orgasm, and I'm going to come in every 15 minutes to monitor you." It ain't gonna happen unless you're porn stars and then you're faking it. So you don't talk about that natural instinct to rub the clitoris at stages during our labour either. Some women, when they're totally in their instinct, they do. And if that's releasing more oxytocin, because the man's job prior to as a woman going into labour is to give her the biggest orgasm ever.
Most of them are entering into that task for their own satisfaction. And I would say it's not for you. It's not your satisfaction. It's all about her. And the minute she becomes pregnant, the whole world is about her. She's served you. Now you serve her.
I mean, on the day, you are the queen. You are the centre of everything. Everything must revolve around you. It is an interesting one, isn't it? When he talks to couples about sex, and when I'm working with couples nutritionally and homeopathically on infertility issues, a couple of things. One is like, the two of you just get your favourite food together, bottle of red wine, Natmure 10M. Natmure is a remedy that holds and doesn't want to be seen. It internalizes everything. So when you take that remedy, it allows you to externalize, to relax. And it's a great remedy, particularly in hospital labours where you've got midwife scurrying in. I'm just being quiet. Oh, Joan, have you got the sake? You're interrupting a really intimate time. When women engage me to be with them during their labour, it's such an honour. It's such an honour because it's such an intimate time in their lives, and I don't ever want them to feel that they can't say anything to me. In fact, it's when I'm engaged, I always say to them and to their partners, I expect you to be honest with me. If you don't like what I've said or done, I'm not going to take offence. I'm not here for that. Maybe we need to talk about it. Maybe I've misunderstood. And during labour, if you tell me to F off, she's gonna love you even more because it's not as I said earlier. Normally, by the time women get to that stage, you know they're very very close to birthing their baby. But it's being able to be that open and honest, and a woman with a vagina on show in a public place. And I think so many hospital staff have forgotten that, even when that blooming useless CTG is on. My eldest is what 33. And the Cochrane database back in the early 90s was clearly stating CCG is ineffective compared to intermittent auscultation. So occasionally we're listening. Yeah, well, she's been there for so long, so long. And yet, and when you quote it to staff and they go, oh yeah, but hospital policy. Well, that's not law, is it?
I've got a real bugbear about people calling hospital guidelines policies. They're guidelines. There are no policies. You cannot put a policy onto a labouring woman because when you are putting a policy onto a labouring woman, what you're saying is that you can't be you. You have to do what we tell you. The only thing that can be a policy is something that has to follow law, which is HR stuff. Midwives are now trained to use the word policy, and I keep going, it's not a policy, it's a guideline. And a guideline
Mhm.
means is this is a pathway that we've done our reading and research, and this is where we've read. This section here supports our narrative. This is what we have read, and this is the guideline that's devised as a result of the reading. There's all this other reading, but we haven't read any of that. But the reading that we've done here has devised a guideline, and you don't
Mhm.
have to follow that guideline because you may do something slightly different. But our job is to recommend this guidance to you. If you choose to go on that guiding pathway, then fair enough. But if you go off piste and you read some of the reading over here and you get a different understanding of how you want to have your baby, suddenly it turns into a policy. But our policy
Mm.
says we haven't got a policy.
I always say to couples and to women that, a guideline or a policy is purely that, it's not legally enforceable. So the VBAC work I've been doing for years, when I go back to 93 when I had my first, and the risk of a rupture was 1 in 200. So first of all, please define a rupture. Could we have the difference between a dehiscence, genuine rupture, which is not good, but the same can happen to a mum labouring for the first time who's been induced. Could we please remember that? What's the history of the woman? How close together were her babies? What's her health like? Did she go into labour spontaneously? Has she been induced? What are her circumstances? So many other questions which are never ever taken into consideration. Then the risk went down to 1 in 350. And then you'd read papers that would have 1 in 1,000. And then you'd bring that and go, but here's this paper. And then there's that paper there. Is it relative or is it absolute?
You can't have anything absolute when it comes to childbirth because every single woman who enters into that journey is entering in with her own background, her own backdrop, and her own story. And that backdrop consists of her age, her history, even of her periods, her history of her childhood, her history of her diet and lifestyle, where she's living now, her emotional relationship with her husband at current point, her education levels, her psychological well-being, her spiritual understanding. There's a whole plethora of stuff here that creates the woman that's standing in front of you. How can you say this pathway we've created is going to work for you? You can't. There is no normal. I've never, ever, ever in the whole of my life or my career met a normal person. Ever. I haven't. Yes. We are all so wonderfully, beautifully, astonishingly, amazingly unique, and that's what makes us human beings. And so how can any of us be normal if we're so individual?